All right, well, in this video, we're going to use Pyro as well as the standard material to create this letter that is burning. So we'll do smoke, fire, and use our material to create almost some kind of ember or ashes. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so here's kind of the final effect here rendered on the left. You can see the old piece of paper, you can see the burning, and you can also see perhaps a little bit of kind of the burnt paper itself that we will be adding there. So while Pyro is kind of the star of the show here, that other material aspect of it does add quite a bit here. Now, in case anybody's curious what assets I'm using, I am using this image for the paper from Adobe Stock. And then if you go to textures.com, I am using the coal material here, really just the emission part of this for that ash kind of burnt paper look. So that is what I'm using if you want to try and follow along. But let's go ahead and get started. So I already have my paper made for me. It is literally just a plane with a bunch of points in it. So I want to make sure everybody sees that. I don't remember the exact amount. Added a bunch of subdivisions segments and then actually subdivided this to get that many. And that's going to help with the vertex map. I also have a displacer just to make it look a little bit more crumpled, a little bit more, authentic or realistic, whatever you want to call it. And, for the time being, I'll turn that off. The first thing I want to do is create a vertex map, which I can do by right-clicking, going to other tags and choosing vertex map. Now, vertex maps can be used in a lot of different places, a lot of different properties in simulations or deformers, you name it. We can also use fields with them. And so we are going to use fields here to really kind of control our vertex map, which we will then use to control pretty much everything we're doing inside of Pyro, where we want it to burn, which is going to be right here. We'll also use a vertex map to kind of blend between the different materials, get rid of the opacity of the letter, fade it off. So a lot of the heavy lifting here is being done with these vertex maps. I'm going to delete the freeze, and we are going to start with a box field. This box field here is going to be our primary field for Pyro. So just trying to size it so we kind of get a narrow band like that, and also make sure it's wide enough that it can kind of go diagonally here and move across. Now, how exactly that does that is entirely up to you. What kind of angle, direction, or movement it takes. So I'll do like 45 degrees there. And now I'm just going to animate this. So on frame 0, I can go ahead and keyframe our box field, go to frame 100, and just kind of pull it all the way through. Right? Maybe even just a little bit past. There we go. And so now as we scrub through this, this is what we should see. The problem with this box field is that it's very, very uniform. Okay, so there's no kind of irregularity to the shape, and that's going to be noticeable when we add Pyro, where we just have this, fire and smoke in this specific kind of area. The way we can break this up a little bit is by using a random field. So I can select this random field, and we can see how it's doing it on everything now, but we want to do it just on top of our box field. So the way we can do that is by either using subtract or multiply. Okay, really kind of doing essentially the same thing. So I'll just keep subtract. I think it looks a little bit better. It's breaking up the edges a little bit more. And you could also control the scale. And you can see how that is another way we can control just the irregularity here. So something like that actually looks pretty good to me. And believe it or not, that's almost it for the Pyro stuff. I'm going to name this vertex map Pyro because we will be creating a few of these, and they can be a bit tricky to work with and keep track of. So I'm going to right click on our letter, going to add simulation tags and choose Pyro. Now I also get my Pyro object here. And in the tag now, what I'm going to do is in the density as well as the temperature properties is where I'm going to drag that vertex map. Okay. And now when we play this, what we should see is it's really only burning, catching fire, in that particular area. Okay. And honestly, that is the majority of the Pyro stuff. Now, we still need to get this to render. Okay. Now, if we're not planning on caching this out right away and we want to get it to render, then what we need to do is come over here to our Pyro object, not the tag, but the Pyro object. And in the object properties here, make sure these density, temperature, and velocity are set to on. By default, they are on export, which means, yes, we'll be able to see it here, but we won't be able to see it when we render. So make sure density, temperature, and velocity. We actually don't need velocity, but it's on by default, so why not just leave it? The other thing we need to do is create a Pyro material. And so you'll want to make sure your render is set to Redshift, and then you can just go to the plus sign, choose materials, and choose Pyro volume, and apply that to the Pyro object. Okay, actually forgot to delete my previous one. And now if we start our render, we will see our Pyro, our flame, our smoke in there. Now, there's definitely still a few things I think we could adjust on this, and we'll do that a little bit. But this is the primary kind of effect I wanted to work with, so we're not going to do too much more here. I would probably take the voxel size down a little bit, maybe something like 3. And I'm going to do that both in our Pyro tag as well as our Pyro object and in the Pyro tab. Now, anytime I make one of these changes, I am going to have to rewind and play through this again. So that's one of the reasons why, we're not going to spend a whole bunch of time working with this, as it would just be very tedious when it comes to, rewinding this and playing it every time we make a change here. So that looks a little bit better, but really it's like the scale of the fire is a bit too big. I would like it to be much smaller. So there's probably also a bit too much fire. What I can do to maybe get rid of some of that fire is in the fuel settings, lower this, the set amount. So that way, 3,000. We can even turn off the render and just trust what we see in our perspective view, since at least for me, that plays back a little bit faster now. So that's going to limit the fire a little bit. So we don't have quite as much. If I want to go lower, I can absolutely do that. Go something like 1,500. And, the amount you will need to adjust these values depends on a number of different things. Your system speed, voxel size, how many segments are on that. All right. Even adjusting the thickness here. If I turn down this thickness, because, this is a piece of paper, I'm going to get significantly less fire. Okay. And I wasn't even getting that much because not really getting anything anymore because I had already turned down the temperature. So just keep in mind that a lot of these values work together. And so the more we start adjusting some, we may need to go back and adjust others, right? So I turn down the thickness. You can see we're getting a lot less fire, which is great. The smoke now is a bit too dark for me. So there's always something here. And so that's why we're only going to do just a little bit more of this. So if we wanted to adjust the amount of smoke or have it dissipate a little bit faster, because that's something I've noticed as I was doing with this, the smoke sticks around a bit too long, and that can be a way to kind of get less, is if you come in here to your Pyro object, and in the Pyro section, if you get rid of or increase the density dissipation here. In fact, I believe the default is actually 7. So it's interesting that it's sticking with these settings even after I create new objects here. But so I raised this from 7% to 15 to help get rid of that a bit more. I could even maybe go a bit higher if I want to get rid of even more of that smoke, or have it dissipate or go away quicker, would be another way of saying that. Now, I haven't found a great way to really work with the scale of the fire. It really, I think, is going to come down to voxel size. But the other thing I thought was helping a little bit was the noise and its scale here. So I believe these values have already been changed from their defaults. So the strength and scale, I'm pretty sure they have been. Let's just double check, which is pretty easy to do. So, no, I set them back to their defaults there. So I do want to go in and change those now a little bit lower. So the noise strength, maybe increase that a little bit to say 4. The noise scale, I'll maybe make smaller, say 10. And let's see what we get. All right, this may work more on the smoke than the fire, but even that wouldn't be the end of the world here. All right, maybe even turn off our... All right, so that seems to be working a bit. I could keep playing with that, but honestly, I think I am relatively happy with that. Okay, and what I would probably do is experiment with taking the voxel size down a little bit more, closer to 1 voxel size if I could, before caching and doing my final rendering. But let's say we are happy with this. We now need to work with our material. So I'm going to create a new node material, and I'm going to load in those textures that I showed you, starting with our letter. Okay, if I just apply that to our letter, that at least makes it look a bit better. Now, I made an opacity map for this image, and let's bring that down here. So you can see where I just kind of ate away the edges to really match the color. And so that will give this a much more interesting and realistic look. And once again, I still have that displacer. Okay. And now if we see what happens when we, play this, and we do have to play through this in order for it to, kind of play the pyro back or simulate the pyro as best it can. And depending on the type of graphics card you have, it can be a bit problematic. It can work slow. So we still have an issue where it's working on those points that we can't see. So there is that little issue, which aside from maybe animating the size of the box field or perhaps its position on like the y-axis, that would probably be the way I would experiment with trying to get rid of it. So this is looking pretty good, but like I've said, we want to get rid of this part on the left side here. And the way we're going to do that is with another vertex map and another field. So I'm going to select my letter, right click, go to other tags, choose vertex map. Make sure to check use fields, delete our freeze again, and I'm going to create a linear field. Okay. And this linear field, I think this is the direction we want. If not, we can always invert it pretty easily. Want to make sure it's rotated about 45 degrees, maybe negative 45. No, I guess that 135 was correct. And shorten the size of it a little bit. Really just kind of move it like something like that. Okay. And rather than animate our, our linear field to kind of match, what I'm going to do is make it a child of the box field, so that now when I scrub through this, you'll see that the linear field follows the box field. And I'm going to name this vertex map matte opacity. I think I spelled opacity wrong. There we go. Okay. And that way I can come back into my material editor. And since I already have something going into my opacity property, I'm going to need to use the multiply so that I can multiply the values from our vertex map and our texture into a single image. Okay. So this will go into input 1. For our vertex map, we're going to use the vertex attribute node. Connect that. And it's another reason why naming can be helpful here, because I need to drag in the vertex map. And because I've named it, I know exactly which one it is and what I want that name to be. And so this is just another place we can use vertex maps, is inside materials here. And now I will connect that to our opacity. And what we should see once I start this over again is the opposite of what we want, where the part that's burning is revealing the letter. So that's an easy fix. We can just come into remapping, check invert, and once this refreshes, or perhaps I will force it to refresh, maybe even start and stop it. That should have done it. So for whatever reason, if that didn't do it, then I can just come in here and rotate this 180 degrees. And honestly, that should probably be good. Well, that's fun. All right, so let's come in here and figure out what is happening. So let's just try the vertex attribute here. Okay, that seems not be working at all anymore. What could be causing that? I'm not soloing it. Perhaps we should solo it. And we can see, oh, interesting. So the values just take a while to get going, but they do match the box field. So let's see what we get. Oops. When we unsolo that now and rewind and play through it. That may be the problem, is that we needed to just rewind, or perhaps just let it play a little bit longer. It's possible the Pyro wasn't really kind of showing the correct frame, and therefore the linear field on top of it was not working correctly. So, no, I'm not convinced it's working. Okay, I am going to pause it, maybe just letting it go a little bit. So it is. Okay, what we want to do though is now take this and make it even smaller to help with the opacity there. And it's interesting because I changed this linear field, which then changes the vertex map, but it doesn't really want to update. That did make it update. So that worked out much better. So, okay, that's kind of the problem here. It's not going to update in real time. Got to refresh it. All right, so that's kind of 2 out of the 3 things there. Now that I fixed this, let's go ahead and reconnect the multiply channel so we can get rid of those edges there. And so that's looking pretty good. All that's left is to add some of that kind of burnt, ashy, burning material. And what we're going to do is create another vertex map for that. So other tags, vertex map. Okay. Once again, use fields. And I'm going to use a box field again. So where is it? It's hiding from me. It's right in front of my face. And adjust the size one more time. This one I'm going to want a little bit wider. And just like the previous one, I'm going to add a random field and subtract it. Okay, and adjust the scale too. There we go. And you could even lower the opacity, so that way, it isn't 100 or 0. A little bit more control, so maybe something like that. And I want to make sure I name this one. This one's going to be called, we'll call this burning, smolder. I don't know exactly what to call this, if I'm being honest. Would help though if I spelled things right. So there we go. And much like I did before, I'm going to take this box field and kind of line it up with our existing one. So this also, we want to rotate to -45 degrees, not 35, but 45. There we go. We may want to make that a little bit narrower. Maybe just kind of do this, kind of the whole thing there. And once again, make it a child. Now, I should have also named my fields here. So this would be matte opacity. I don't know why I keep wanting to put, this is going to be burn, smolder. I actually do want to keep linear field in there so I know what type of field it is. Box field, we'll just call this box field pyro. There we go. Okay. So I need to create one more material and texture. And this texture I know is going to go into our base color as well as our emission. And this is going to be our kind of coal burning texture, which kind of works, kind of doesn't. I probably should have just used a noise and made it myself. So I did turn up the emission weight as well, just so we could see that. Could maybe even go higher, just based on my previous tests. And I'm also going to increase the scale here because I know it'll make it smaller. What I can do now is apply this material, and that's what we have, but we want to constrict it to just kind of the areas that is burning and right after it. So back in here, and I should have named this material. So let's do that. We'll call this smolder burn. Take our vertex attribute node in opacity, and we're going to add that last vertex map to it. And we can see now, really should have also added a multiply and our texture, the alpha texture for the paper, just to make sure we don't get the material visible on those parts, since those parts are in fact hidden. So there it is. Okay, so that should look a bit better. And while I think we're probably seeing a bit too much of this, I would almost prefer that over the opposite. And we've just stacked the material using Cinema 4D's new kind of Redshift's ability to take advantage of Cinema 4D stacking. I can always come in here, find that, oh, that wasn't a linear field. This was a box field. And adjust its size a little bit if I want to. So if I want it to be a bit smaller, I can do that. I will need to refresh it. And I'm thinking that looks pretty good. So that will do it for this video. As I mentioned, the Pyro was a little bit of the easier process compared to the materials and getting all of that stuff to work together. But that will do it for this video. If there's anything else you would like to see, please let me know. Feel free to do that in a comment. Like the video if you learned something, and I'd appreciate it if you could give me a subscribe. So until next time, take care.